Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Moving up the chain of the pyramid of pain towards artifacts. So artifacts could be network or host based, and they're certainly annoying, right, for the adversary to overcome. And so what are some of the things that you would think about when it comes to network artifacts and host artifacts? So network artifacts is going to help you distinguish malicious activity from, maybe what legitimate users are doing, right? Examples might be certain URI patterns. It could be command and control type information, embedded protocols, etc. When we get into host artifacts, obviously now we're looking at the host specifically. And again, we're going to try to identify malicious activities on the host versus maybe legitimate ones, right? And the goal here would be, maybe finding things that are running in memory. It might be things that have been added to the registry or file or directory, right? As an analyst, we might be using these artifacts to determine whether or not there's residual from an attack. So the attack may have taken place earlier on, and the only thing left might be this program that starts from the run key in the registry, right? And so as a responder or investigator, you're going to want to query your endpoints to see if that residual exists. And again, going back to Locard's exchange principle, right? This is that, hair follicle that falls under on a carpet, right? A fiber carpet, and you need to figure out or find it, right? To help maybe tie DNA to a potential suspect. And when I say potential, it doesn't mean it could be a hair follicle that fell out of anybody's hair, right? But maybe it fell out of the suspect's hair. Same thing with the registry, right? We might be looking for certain information that leads us towards, a suspect or evidence of compromise, and ultimately figuring out how it took place. So when we look at detection around artifacts, we're looking at Endpoint AMP, Umbrella, Tetration, Firepower, Email, Web, Threat Grid, Stealthwatch, right? Detection capabilities throughout the entire portfolio of capabilities. Prevention, from the previous slide, we've added a couple, right? So Endpoint AMP, Umbrella, Tetration, Firepower, Email, and Web. Okay, let's dig into the meat of this, right? So Stealthwatch and Cognitive, obviously, again, I reiterate this because I don't know if folks have jumped into the video midway, right? As opposed to starting at part 1. Maybe they're looking for something very specifically. So Stealthwatch and Cognitive consumes flow data, right? Providing detection capabilities into a variety of artifacts, leveraging behavioral analysis with machine learning capabilities. I think, in Cognitive alone, there's 40 algorithms that make up the machine learning capability that's part of that offering. And so we can detect items like full URI, C2 channels, host registry insight. You get protocols being leveraged and so on, right? Because we're feeding this with additional intelligence, right, as well. And so we're getting that additional insight. So both network and host-based artifacts can be discovered there. Additional context data can be provided by the network visibility module, right? This includes device, process making the connection, the parent process, user invoking the process. So as an example, it might be PowerShell under NT Authority subsystem making a call to a C2 channel, right? So the network visibility module or IPFix data can then be enhance the Stealthwatch flow data to give us a little bit more specifics around what actual process and under what user actually made the call. So that's pretty cool. Cisco ICE also enriches the data around contextual insight and into the asset connecting to the network. So again, we're getting better context into the device and maybe insight into its Windows 10, its corporate asset, etc. Again, proxy log data can also enrich that with URI information as well. Intelligence gained here can be used in preventative platforms. So again, it's purely a detection capability from Stealthwatch. Endpoint AMP, Cisco Endpoint AMP can detect artifacts both network as well as the host. This includes things like C2 channel, full URI, PowerShell execution, command line arguments that were leveraged. Endpoint AMP also prevents malicious file process to block additional artifacts, such as blocking an IP address connection or file process from being executed. So we can use Endpoint AMP actually not only to detect, but also prevent some of this activity that might take place from some of these artifacts. Integration with ThreatGrid includes insight into multiple additional artifacts, such as registry entries, file activity, network connections, and more. If any artifact, files are created during submission analysis, AMP ThreatGrid displays summary information of each artifact. Endpoint and cloud-based IOC scans, as well as orbital scans, are also available, providing insight into artifacts of interest. So, for example, I can quickly run an orbital scan from Endpoint AMP to tell me what services are running on an endpoint, right? I can also pull what registry or specific registry keys that I'm interested in looking for. Obviously, intelligence gains here can be used in preventative platforms. Firepower Threat Defense has the ability to detect and prevent threats and provide insight into artifacts such as web links that connect to a C2 server or applications making suspicious or malicious network connections. Firepower also supports packet captures for additional analysis and insight. Integration with ThreatGrid includes insight into multiple additional artifacts, again, registry entries, file activity, network connections, and more. Intelligence can be used in other preventative platforms. Email. Cisco Email has the ability to detect and prevent threats and provide insight into artifacts such as web links, so URIs embedded in emails, or files that connect to C2 servers. Integration with ThreatGrid includes insight into multiple additional artifacts such as registry entries, file activities, network connections, and more. You can see a recurring theme, right? So if you have a malware license as an example, you're going to get the ThreatGrid integration with Firepower, with Endpoint AMP, with email security, with web security, right? That integration is part of that malware license. URL detection and URL filtering and cloud or Cisco Cloud URL analysis and integration with AMP. Antivirus and outbreak filter further detects host-based artifacts that traverses the email security solution. So intelligence gained here can be used to feed into other preventative platforms. Web, right? With cognitive, you've got Cisco Web Security Appliance can block network artifacts deemed malicious, such as connections to CNC. We also have the ability to do L4 traffic monitoring capabilities, can also block IP addresses to botnet or phone home activities, right? So this is a span port where L4 information gets fed into. Based on that information, we could actually send, reset information back to the endpoint and ultimately block that connectivity. Cognitive leveraging behavioral analysis of network traffic and to detect anomalies, identify symptoms of malware infections or data breach. Integration with ThreatGrid, very much the same, right? Artifacts could include things like startup activities, created drop files, contacted domains, IPs, static file information, network behavior, and system behavior. And intelligence gained here can be used to feed into other preventative platforms. So ThreatGrid does a lot. So I'm trying not to, take all of ThreatGrid's glory in the other technologies. And so I try to give you little snippets of how we could further enhance that capability to provide either the detection or prevention capabilities. So in this slide here, you can see, we've done a pretty good job around both detection and prevention. Umbrella Selective Proxy obviously can detect and prevent malicious hashes from and leveraging Cisco Talos Intelligence and ThreatGrid sandboxing provides us insight into these hashes. And so that insight into these hashes can be used to further investigate the details around that. So jumping now into threat grid, getting deeper analysis for richer behavioral insight. Cisco Umbrella can block network artifacts deemed malicious, such as connection to an exploit kit server, right? Integration with threat grid further enriches your insight into artifacts being leveraged, such as startup activities, created drop files, contacted domains, IPs, static file information, network behavior, and system behavior. These can be used to feed into preventative platforms. Umbrella Investigate gives the most complete view of relationships and the evolution of the internet. So domains, IPs, and files, because we have that insight with using Umbrella Investigate, we can very quickly pinpoint the attacker's infrastructure and potentially predict that future threat. And so the goal here would be, again, if the attacker's infrastructure contains, an exploit kit server, a command and control server, etc., maybe it's just blocking the domain, and that's enough to defeat the adversary. It might be domains and maybe file hashes, right? The goal here is to find an opportunity to mitigate that risk, and having the intelligence or insight into all of the components that make up the threat are going to certainly help you achieve that. Threat grid has the ability, so now we're looking at a detective capability, and obviously calculates hash to determine behaviors and supporting artifacts associated with the hash. This includes identifying network and host-based artifacts that are seen when a file is executed within a sandbox environment. So again, right, you're feeding this into threat grid, maybe using an API or integration through Cisco product or other, but you might also be in the portal as an analyst and manually submitting your own samples and doing your own analysis, leveraging the platform. Threat grid integration through APIs can provide preventative capabilities, including retrospection. We talked about that in previous videos, right? The ability to go back in time and say, before we knew it was bad, it's bad now. So you might need to investigate these 3 hosts that may have seen it prior to us knowing that it's bad. And moving forward, we're going to block any future threat. Again, threat grid would have to feed this information into a preventive platform. The behavioral indicators obviously provide insight into the adversary. They're indicators of malicious activity. Behavioral indicators could include threat severity levels, HTTP traffic, DNS traffic, TCP/IP network sessions, processes, artifacts, registry activities, file activities, etc. Intelligence used here can be used in preventative platforms. Tetration, now we get both preventative and detection capabilities. So Tetration collects and baselines processes and process details running on each server. So, it understands the server and how it communicates, what it needs to talk to the network, and understands that. And now I can use that information to build in controls or whitelist. Obviously for data center type technology, that's very, very helpful. If I can whitelist the data center, that would certainly reduce my attack surface. The information includes process ID, process parameters, the user associated with it, process start time, process hash. This information includes both network and host-based artifacts supporting the investigation and mitigation, right? So again, when I'm looking and doing my analysis, I'm not only going to understand the processes or the hash that might be assigned to the process, so that's an artifact, right? But also maybe a communication channel that took place, like it's talking to a C2 channel, right? Cisco Tetration and if you're whitelisted, you may have mitigated that risk, meaning it couldn't make that call outbound. And this is, again, where the value comes in, because now it's more of an investigative or detection tool to say, I've been compromised. Here are the elements that or the artifacts that I've been able to capture. One of that happens to be the C2 server. And again, now I can take that and feed into my preventative capabilities as well. You can also search for servers running specific processes or process hash information to get a tree view snapshot. That's actually pretty cool. If you've never seen it, I think I have that included in SecureX video that I've done around Tetration, but it's really, really cool the way that process tree maps out. Cisco Tetration also has algorithms available to track behavior pattern changes and find similarities to malware behavior patterns. So for example, a privilege escalation followed by shellcode execution. Tetration raises security events for such behaviors and deviations, so we're alerted and we understand that that's taken place. The security operations team can customize those events, their severity, and associated actions by using simple to define rules, right? Very easy to implement those rules. Using this information, security operations can quickly identify IOCs and take remediation steps to minimize the impact. Communication from files with said hashes can be blocked with Tetration as well. And intelligence gained here obviously can be, fed into other preventative platforms. So again, pretty neat capabilities. As we move up the stack, we've got a combination of detection and prevention capabilities. Again, if you've got a combination of these elements, you're making it very, very difficult for the adversary to be successful.